welcome to the latest episode of High Stakes. I'm Paige Soya, the managing partner of K Street Capital, and today's episode is all about how to land a job in VC and how do VC firms actually build their teams out and how do they hire. And we've got Myrto Lalacos with us today, which is really exciting. She has a ton of experience in this specific area. And before we kick it off, Myrto, do you want to just share a little bit about, maybe introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be doing this with you. I'm a principal at VC Lab here at the parent company Desal Group, and we help democratize access to venture capital. We do this in a lot of ways, but in kind of my side of the company and where I sit, we do this through a lot of programs. So we run the largest accelerator for VCs worldwide. We accelerate about 60% of all new firms that launch globally at this stage, which is insane to think about.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah. The scale of it and the demand goes beyond what you can imagine. There's all these different kind of regions popping up, but we also are starting to build a whole ecosystem around these new and emerging VC funds that we accelerate and that we help to launch. On the one side, we help to build out their teams. So we realize that there's all of these kind of very promising high growth potential VC funds that are launching and they're looking to build out their teams. And there's a lot of demand to work in VC, but there isn't necessarily a lot of talent around that's ready to come in and really help these fund managers grow their firm and take them to the next level. So we launched a program called Venture Institute, which helps anyone at any kind of seniority build the foundation that they need to start a career in venture capital. And the success of it has been huge. Like we run these about 2 times a year now, and they're 8-week programs. We then help the top performers get residencies within actual VC firms so that they can get the real hands-on experience. We also have a program called LP Institute, which trains in private or individual and institutional investors to invest in venture capital as an asset class. So building out the future of venture capital from the ground up, from kind of the team all the way to the LP level. And in terms of my background, I ran accelerators, both for corporates as like their innovation programs, and I ran accelerators at universities. And then I got headhunted by an emerging VC firm that was launching in my area in the UK where I used to live. And they quickly grew and they're now one of the largest VC firms of that region. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, what I do, and our work at Desal Group.
That's incredible. There's so many things that we can touch on that have led you to this point and just having all of those experiences. But I also just want to say we met, just for the audiences, and you might remember this, Myrto, but like we met in California a couple of years ago, I think, when you were at Desal. And I went through Desal's VC lab program with you back in the early cohort days. And it was that created this podcast, because that was one of the ecosystem building and like networking things that that were like recommended, and I would have never done it otherwise. And I think it's been a huge help to the firm and to our entire ecosystem of listeners, all of the founders and all of the investors that listen to these. So thank you.
Well, I love that. So I had no idea that this is how it started, but yeah, I think it makes so much sense. And like a lot of things that we do at Desal Group, it's so much about the community, and venture capital is so much about the community, and so is it's so cool to hear that this is how this started, and so happy to be a guest here.
This was the genesis. There was one of those sprints in that original cohort where I was like, all right, I'll do an episode. I'll create one episode and just try it. And just trying it, even if it's stupid, no one watches it and you never do it again. But then I was like, oh, it's not so hard. Maybe we could do this. And it is interesting and people do appreciate it. And we get a ton of feedback about it. So I'm like ever grateful to VC Lab. This podcast especially is ever grateful to you guys. So let's get into the topic. The first thing that I wanted to touch on, how do you land a job in VC? And that can mean a lot of different things. We were talking about this earlier. You might be wanting to start your own VC firm yourself, maybe, or you want to find a job in an existing VC firm. But obviously, it's a super competitive and challenging space. Maybe I'll just take a step back and you can share your perspective on it, and then we can go from there.
I can start out by giving some personal stories and my story of how I landed a job as a VC, and then a friend's story of how he landed a job, the way he did it, and then how we do it through Venture Institute. So maybe I'll start with myself. When I was at university, we were going through this period in tech when we were really seeing these like massive shifts start to happen. So Facebook changed the way you do marketing forever. And then there was all these kind of like mobile phones started being something that everybody owned. And there was all these different kind of companies that were switches like Nokia, and then it was BlackBerry, and then it was iPhone, and they were sweeping out the entire market. So it was a really important period in tech. So I started getting really interested in that whole space, and I was like, started being obsessed by how you take an idea and turn it into a company that actually creates a lot of impact in the world. And that's how I ended up in this space. And I was just doing all these things. I was helping out entrepreneurs in my network. And then I started running accelerators. And then we started like launching these student run VC funds on campus. And so it started when I was studying. And then me and my friends started building bridges with the actual startup ecosystem of the city that I was studying in.
Oh, wow.
So this is like how I got into it. And then because I'd done so many things on campus, when I graduated, I was approached by one of the first corporate accelerator operators in the UK where I lived at the time. And I was like running corporate accelerator programs for a long time. And where I was coming at it was that we're doing all of these accelerators, and you can do all the mentoring and the networking and the community building that you can, but that's only going to move the needle so much. What entrepreneurs really need when it comes down to it is funding, right? And so I was like, okay, if I do want to help these entrepreneurs, then I need to help them access funding, right? So it started becoming an idea, and then it was by chance that a recruiter kind of reached out to me, and he was like, hey, there's this fund being set up in the UK, and they're looking to build out the team. And all of these entrepreneurs, you have worked with all of these corporate clients, you understand their innovation needs. This is a B2B fund that's being set up. B2B SaaS was an investment focus. Everyone else who's launching this comes more from like a corporate and M&A background, and they need someone like you who's on the ground. And that's really what kind of attracted them to me as a profile. And so I think there's a huge kind of element here of getting into venture capital. A lot of firms just want people who are on the ground, who know the entrepreneurs, who go to all the events, they know all the people running the accelerators, and you can really help to plug them into an existing ecosystem. So that's one example. And then a friend of mine was basically wanting to apply for a platform manager role at one of the largest VC funds out there right now. And this role came up, and as you know very well, Paige, whenever kind of one of these roles comes up, there's a tsunami of applications.
Tsunami, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so he was like, I really want this. And he was, by the way, like, we were friends from school, and we used to do a lot of these events and accelerators together. So he's been in the ecosystem for a long time. But I remember I was talking to him, and he was applying for this job, and he showed me what he did. And it was like, he created a website which served as a portfolio to show all of the things that he had achieved in the past that were related to this platform manager role, with videos and testimonials,
wow,
and like case studies, and like this insane piece of work that he sent in with his application, and he got the job.
That's amazing.
It just goes to show like the level of competition. Like there's not only a ton of people applying, but you have to compete.
But I think that's such a good point, because like a big part of, if you want to get into VC, you want to land a job in VC, being a part of the ecosystem and networking and knowing who the players are, that's a big piece of it. And that adds a lot of value to getting that job, getting the acceptance at a job like that. I think you do have to have some level of network to do it to begin with. Then when you apply, to your point, like you have to go above and beyond and set yourself apart, because there's so many applicants and you're looking through them so quickly. I would love for you to talk a little bit about the analyst program that you guys, like the training and the sort of helping early career candidates figure out how to get into venture, and like how competitive even that pool is just to get into that program, let alone actually going out and applying for the jobs.
Yeah, no, of course. So Venture Institute, as I said, it was set up as a means for us to help new and emerging fund managers build out their teams. And of course, there's huge demand to kind of work in the space right now. And we were like, okay, we're going to be hitting two birds with one stone here. And yeah, so the program's completely free, by the way, to join. And we try to allow as many people as possible that we can help.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now it's we had to cap the last one at 380, and we had to like decline a huge amount of like really talented people who send in an application later than anyone else. And basically what we do, and this is for all levels. So it could be people might end up becoming venture partners or principals or take on even more senior roles sometimes, but many of them are more analyst, intern kind of level. But yeah, our program is designed to really give people a 360-degree view of what it's like to launch and operate a venture capital fund. I think a lot of these existing programs for people that want to start a career in VC, they focus a lot on the deals aspect of a fund, which is obviously huge, and that's what VCs are supposed to be doing. But I think it just excludes a lot of areas that are really important to running a VC fund that these programs don't address. People who are in the program, they will understand how the back office works, for example, in a VC firm, why that's so important, why that can make or break a VC fund, the importance of pitching limited partners, who are the limited partners, and how do you bring them into the fund and keep them engaged? What are the financials and the economics of a VC fund? What do those look like? So it's really just helping them understand what the managers have to deal with when they're running a firm. That's how we are different from a lot of the other programs. And yeah, and the way that we run it is that we have this huge pool of candidates, and every week they come in and there's a session, a webinar. We bring really talented mentors and speakers from within our ecosystem who are the best in the world, probably, at what they do. So like the best deals person, the best back office person, the best economics person, right? So they're being mentored by really skilled and experienced people in the field. And then they have to do sprints or homework every week. So they go through this curriculum and we can see their work. And then we can see who's really talented and who's the top performer there. And what happens is that we will take all the top performers of these batches. This time around, it was about 50. And 50 of the kind of people who completed the program will now be placed into residencies and will be working directly with fund managers, helping them to grow their firm. But yeah, one of the, like, going back to the community aspect, a huge element of it is obviously there's like, how do you run and operate a VC firm and how do you make deals and all of that. But a huge part of the program that was introduced this time around was more of this like community building and local ecosystem support. So we're really having these people start to build their own personal brand within their local startup community. And then they're using their brand to elevate whatever's happening in the ecosystem. So if there's like an event, then they'll promote the event, or, you know,
Exactly.
kind of reach out to people and see how they can help and stuff like that. And I think that's been really successful. And this is already helping this latest batch land jobs easier.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical piece of it that people don't realize. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about how you think about when you're training people or sharing how venture firms actually get built and grow their teams. How do those firms balance their investing roles from those other roles, like the platform roles or the operating roles, marketing, finance, all of that stuff, especially in an early VC firm? I guess there's a number of large VCs you could go to work for, but there's not as many of those as there are smaller funds that are maybe even sub $100 million funds, fund 1, 2, and 3 type firms that are also hiring, and they're smaller, and so they have to balance these sort of hiring needs. And I'm curious what you're seeing or what advice you give to people trying to apply for those kinds of jobs.
In our kind of ecosystem, it's a lot of these newer funds, so they would be around the fund 1 to 3 mark. And What we're seeing from their perspective is that they tend to start out by building out their venture partner suite almost. So they'd be solo managers, or it would be them and maybe another one or two people launching and running the firm. And usually the first kind of roles that they would look to hire are these venture partners, and they would be specialists in whatever kind of sector they're building their fund's thesis around, or they may have an expertise in an area which they feel the managing directors are lacking. So that's the first kind of area. And I think there it's the people who are looking to break into venture capital who are best positioned are those who have very deep sector expertise. So we see this a lot with people who have worked in biotech or deep tech or software engineers and just understand the more technical aspects of the startups. Those people are really well positioned, and what they need is literally just a program like Venture Institute where they get to learn the basics about operating a VC fund, and then they're good to go.
I think it's critical because even at our firm, which is like, we're a little bit weird because we have a fund and direct, and we also have a fund of funds at the same time. So we have a team of people. But when we think about our next hires, like we think about if we're bringing in a new analyst, someone to work on the investment side, they may not have that much experience. Maybe they have a few years, but they're like early in their career. They're not going to be making investment decisions yet. But they'll be part of the diligence process, and they need to know like how to write an investment memo, how to evaluate the deals, and how do we evaluate them at our firm. But also the other half of that is the operational piece. Like being an early stage VC firm, you're not going to have a huge team, and everybody wears a lot of hats. So I think understanding the administration and like the operations of a fund and how it works goes a long way when you're trying to find a job, because those are the things that like everybody wears those hats in the firm. Like that's not really only one person's job. Everybody has to contribute to those kinds of things. And I think that goes a long way in the hiring process.
Yeah. And we're seeing this now as well with this latest batch where a lot of people, and when you ask people, okay, you want to work in venture capital, what do you want to do? And everyone's, I want to do deals. Everyone wants to invest.
Everyone wants to do deals, you know?
Yeah. And find the winners. But then that's the reality, is what you're drawing the picture of it. There's so many other things that need to be done outside of deals, and a lot of people just don't. It's not that they don't want to do it, they just don't have the awareness that these things are also really important. A lot of the residents that are now going to start working with VC firms in this latest batch of Venture Institute, they're actually going to be helping fund managers fundraise, and this is such a key activity.
Probably the most important activities, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And I think managers can get all the support that they need in when it comes to fundraising. And for example, a lot of these people are going to gain experience now helping fund managers fundraise, and that just makes them so much more valuable when they go out to market to say that I helped get a fund to a close.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyone that can have that added. We actually had an analyst that similarly did that, and he brought in a couple of LPs, and we were like, wow, this is great. You understand the ecosystem of people, you're confident to speak about it, you're speaking about it a lot inside and outside of work, and so you're able to make some of those introductions and make those connections, and it's huge especially for fund ones, right? For those very first like getting started firms. I think that's super important and a really good point. Also, when we look at funds through our fund of funds, one of the things that we've realized over time is like when we take an LP stake in a fund, when we are the LP, like one of the most important things, if it's an early or small fund, is can they fundraise? That's the probably most important thing, is are they able to actually fundraise? And because that is the lifeblood of the business. If you can't raise the money to do the deals, you can't do them. So yeah, that's a pretty big criteria for us.
Yeah, exactly. How LPs are actually diligencing how good the managers are at fundraising. It's insane. And it's okay. I want to know, first of all, that you're going to be able to reach the target for this present fund, but I'm also diligencing you because I want to know if I'm going to continue being an LP, because I want to find a good manager who can manage my capital, not for fund one, but fund two and beyond.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice for people to hear, just how important that particular skill set is. And then I guess I wanted to ask you another question about the points at which VC firms decide it's time to scale a team. And I'm curious, like, what you've been seeing. I know a lot of these are maybe they're on fund one, so they're just at the genesis, so they're making their very first hire, so that's day one for them. But then as the firms grow, it takes many years for firms to become larger and raise fund two and three. And at what points are you guys seeing that fund managers will need to make hires, or are there easy ways to tell? Like if you were in the audience and you're trying to find a job and you're looking around at VCs, how do you figure out which ones might actually be at a point where they need somebody?
I think it varies a lot, but a very good indicator is the closing of a fund, or if you're like launching a new fund. And basically it's when there's a lot more capital to manage and you're maybe getting to the end of what your personal pipeline in terms of deals has generated, and you now need more people to be on the ground and go to these events and start talking to founders, and that because you can't do it and you have a lot more capital that's ready now to be deployed, and the clock has started ticking on the deployment of the capital. So yeah, anytime that if you know that there's a new fund on the way, or there's been a close of a new fund or anything like that, again, it's difficult because that's not public information usually, again, but maybe through your local ecosystem, you might hear whispers of there's a new fund being set up or in this firm, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said that, because that's how I always answer. It's like once a firm raises a fund and does a close, they hire the team, and that is the team pretty much, unless somebody leaves. That's pretty much the team until there's another fundraise, right? How it works. Yeah.
And the other thing, I guess, that people may or may not understand is that it is like how a lot of things in the funds, just in the VC firms, are tied to the funds. And that's also at a contractual level, because for every fund, you have your carry pool that's distributed amongst the different members of the team. Obviously, managing directors, managing partners, general partners will have the large part of that, but then there's some level of carry that's distributed to venture partners, of course, principals, and then sometimes even analysts and associates. The idea is that you keep that team for the entire duration of the fund. And sometimes you may bring people in later down the line, but I don't know if it's done so often. And also, the other thing to think about is how a lot of these, especially for newer fund managers, these funds are quite small, so around the $10 million mark. The fees that you get need to cover not only the salaries, but a ton of other kind of operations within the firm. And so there really isn't a lot of capital and money laying around to pay these salaries. And you may even be, if you do work for a smaller fund, you may not have a very glamorous salary. So I think that's also important to understand.
Even true in bigger than $10 million fund sizes, because like even a $50 million fund, now it's bigger. You're expected to have more full-time hires than you would have had before, and you're still trying to split up those fees to cover all of it, and to operate the business, and to do your go-to-market, right? Like all of your marketing, all of your everything that you do that keeps you as an important ecosystem player as a VC. Like I always say, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I always say, like, when I first started working in VC, I was just investing on my own. Nobody was paying me. I was just investing some of my own small dollars into deals. And then I started managing this sort of small syndicate, K Street, and I wasn't getting paid for that either, right? Like I never got paid for years, like years and years, until we built it to a point where it was bigger and we had enough investors that we had enough fee revenue that we could pay people and hire them. But it's like a 10+ year journey, I think, from day one on to get to a point where you would get like a super highly paid VC role, just because that's a even more competitive type of role within VC that's harder to find, and it takes longer to get there.
Exactly. And also I did this kind of small survey, I think it was 2 years ago, the last time I did it, where it's trying to create a little bit of transparency around compensation and venture capital. And the way it worked is that you fill in kind of anonymous details about what you get paid in salary, carry, and bonus in your role in a VC firm, And then you also say where the firm is based and how large the firm is. And anyway, we started like getting some insight into, what people are getting paid at various levels of the role. And it was really funny because then I sat down and did a small analysis, and actually the roles that take the smaller salaries are the general partners and managing partners. And then they get paid only in carry, and then they like tend to pay people in
More than they pay themselves. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. It's crazy. People don't realize that's totally the truth. I also wanted to ask you if you, from your opinion, what do you think is the most underrated role in a VC that more firms should invest in?
Yeah, I think it's back office fund admin, to be honest. This is an area we touch on a lot within Desal Group, but I think a lot of people just don't understand. And it's really the backbone of a firm in a lot of ways. And because firms operate in such regulated environments, it's super, super important that everything in the back is run really well. I think a lot of the industry doesn't really realize the extent to which there are kind of vendors that don't really, you could be a lawyer, but it doesn't mean you can be a lawyer for a VC firm necessarily. There's a lot of very deep kind of sector legal quirks that you wouldn't know unless you've been doing this for a really long time as a lawyer. Same thing with accountants. It doesn't mean that because you can be an accountant for any type of business that you can be an accountant for a VC firm. The books are completely different. The way you track things is so much more complex and just different from any other type of business. But I guess where I want to take this is that I think a lot of people who want to work in VC don't realize that this is also a very important area. Outside of the deals and working directly with the startups, there is a lot of need for people who can manage a very sound back office, or accountants that kind of are needed to run the accounting on the VC firms and stuff like that. So I think that's definitely underrated, and people don't realize how much of a need there is in those areas too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Like from my own experience, I was an operator before I was an investor, so I was like, I'll do this part myself, right? I'm good at this. I'll figure this out. And I did for a while, but it was so exhausting. It was like another job on top of my already very time-consuming job. And when you're in VC and you need to be out and doing things all the time, and then you come back to the office and you have to like have focused time to obviously do the deals and do the diligence, but then you have to have on top of that this other focused bucket of time to deal with all of the administration, the legal, compliance, all of the questions that you get from LPs. Like you just don't even realize how many questions you're going to get and things that are going to come up that you don't know how to deal with, and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with. And after a while, I was like, this just should be somebody else's role. Otherwise, I can't leverage myself in the best way possible for the firm if I don't do this. And I think most people don't realize it until they don't believe it until they see it themselves. But I hope this helps some people skip over that step, because I think it's super important to have that, or to have a great back end like Desal, right? Like we use Desal obviously, but it like that, having that whole team of people back there that they're dedicated to you, right? So you can ask them and they can help you right away with anything pretty much in that category. And that's a lot easier than like what I was doing before, where I know a lot of other VCs, of course, and we like would ask people that we knew and try to get advice and try to figure it out for, like in a scrappy sort of way, but it never was as good, and it was always more time consuming.
Yeah. And I do want to say one thing, because we have a new team member who's joined us recently, and she used to do a lot of the back office for a different firm just by herself. And because she didn't come from that background, but because she was more of an operator person, she was tasked to run a lot of these things for the firm. And she came and she started working with a lot of the VC firms that we work with that are at Fund 1, maybe Fund 2. And at Desal Group, we just do everything for them. And what she kept saying at one of the offsites recently, she was like, these managers, they don't know how good they have it because they never
experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we do everything for them. They don't understand how good they have it.
They really don't. Yeah.
It's a huge job. Yeah.
It's a huge job. Yeah, great. I think that's great advice. Okay, so the last three questions are, these are really very specific to you, Myrto, so you can answer them however you like. But, and you touched on this earlier, but what do you think is the most interesting inside baseball thing that you learned about in venture capital once you started actually working in the space?
Yeah, you gave that one away, but it was this. I think I was so mind blown. I was already super, I think I understood working at a VC fund and an emerging fund how important kind of fundraising was, obviously, but I never understood the extent that it goes to. And it just extends so far beyond just raising capital for the firm, but it's also just a skill that you need to develop as a fund manager, and that you need to show that you have that ability to future LPs, because they will diligence your ability to fundraise for the firm, which I never thought would be the case. And yeah, I think a lot of new managers that we work with, I think, and also I guess like people who want a job in VC don't really realize that. And yeah, I forgot the direction I wanted to take it there, but yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, it's a huge it's a hugely important lifelong skill that you need to have it being in
Yeah.
VC.
I
Right?
remember what I wanted to say, because a lot of kind of people who want to come into VC lab because they're launching a fund, they're asking us if we make intros to LPs. And by design, we don't, because we understand how crucial it is for these fund managers to develop the fundraising muscle almost, because they will need to do it for as long as they have the fund and show that they're good at it, right? So, yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I'll just reiterate. I know I touched on this earlier, but I think it's important. Like when we invest in funds as an LP, because we do that too, we always one of the most important criteria is, can they fundraise? Because we want to make sure that they can hit their target and that they can actually deploy the capital and diversify the capital in the way that we want them to, and that they're able to do that over time in a way that's not overly distracting to them, like that they are able to manage their time and figure out how to do that while also investing in deals and having the great deal flow. And it's a really hard thing. And we have a lot of managers that come in and they think that they're going to raise big funds, and we can only invest in funds that are a certain size or bigger. And so if they don't raise at least that much, we will not make an investment commitment. So we're not going to make an investment commitment until we see that demonstrated and have evidence of it, and we can see that someone has worked that muscle, and they know you're going to be working that muscle for the rest of your career if you stay in VC. So it's really important.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then what would you say is your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I think I didn't think about this a lot, but one thing that does come to mind is a period of my life where, and you said this was personal, so I'm going to make it a little bit more personal, but where
Yeah.
I just looked around in my life and I was like, whoa, you just have work going for you. And it was because I'm a very career oriented person, and I know a lot of your listeners are this way. I think the biggest failure in my life was just taking this a little bit too far, to the point where I neglected or figured out that I haven't really built my life in a way that there are things outside of work that I'm prioritizing and I'm nurturing, such as relationships or being close to family and stuff like that, doing things that are good for me. And yeah, and I think it was just like realizing that I was in that place and turning my life around. I actually moved back to Greece. That was one of the reasons why I came back home. And yeah, I just started paying a lot more attention to these other things. And I think they've actually made me a better professional overall. So yeah, I think that's what I would.
I think that's great. That's great advice. I really do. It is a mistake, and I think everybody falls into that trap when you're trying to build something, whether you're a startup founder or you're starting a VC or you are a VC. Like it's not an easy job, and so it's like there's no end to the amount of work you could be doing ever. There never is.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think setting those boundaries is key. And then the last question is, what's the best advice you've ever received? And this also can be venture, or it can be unrelated to venture. It's up to you.
Yeah. So it was early. I think I was still studying at the time, and I went to university and I realized I don't have any work experience. A lot of people my age would have worked at a restaurant over the summer and stuff like that. I did none of that. So I have zero work experience. And I remember that I was like, okay, this summer I need to land an internship. And so I did this whole thing to land an internship. And this guy was kind of like really did it out of kindness to bring me into the organization and just really helped me out there. Because if you don't have work experience, it's really hard to get internships and stuff like that. So he really gave me a shot. And I remember I bumped into him at the dentist's office after I was done with the internship. And I went up to him and I was like, thank you so much for the opportunity that you gave me. Like, it was life-changing. I learned so much. And I just like really understood how big of a favor he was doing me. And what he said was probably the best advice that I ever received. He said, Myrto, you don't need to thank me, because in life, it's not about the opportunities that are given to you. It's about what you do with those opportunities that matters. And so he was just saying, and I think it's so important, and it's maybe a little bit banal, but people will give you opportunities and you will encounter opportunities, but it's really up to you to make the most out of them.
100%. I think that's great advice. And it sounds like you did. Now, like, it worked. Yeah. So that's great. That's a wrap.